episode of the Good Side of Sports podcast. I'm your host, Brian Hartong, and today I am joined by an OSU football legend. He burst onto the scene in 2002, becoming the first freshman to start at running back, and he compiled over 1,200 yards rushing and 18 touchdowns. He made one of the most iconic individual plays in national championship game history, and also scored the decisive touchdown in double overtime to defeat the Miami Hurricanes and give the Buckeyes the national championship. He seemed destined to make the jump into the NFL, but as life goes, sometimes there's twists and turns on the road to ultimate success. And today we're going to talk about some of that. So today I'd like to welcome Maurice Clarett to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So recently, me and my wife rewatched the 30 for 30 documentary, Youngstown Boys, and a lot of times I think those episodes depict the end of the story for individuals or situations, but I feel like in your case, it was just the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, and for people who've probably never seen the 30 for 30 series, when they first started it, it was to sort of tell what happened to athletes after their sporting career in some capacity. And when they approached me on it back in, I think 2011, 12, 13, somewhere around there, they were saying you're one of the youngest people that we've ever done a 30 for 30 on. And so I was still young. Like they had done something on the Fab Five, and then they had done something on Marcus Dupree, and they had even done the 30 for 30 were Donald Trump, when it was with the admirals and things of that nature. I forget the story, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people see them. And so I knew early on when we did the film that I would still have a chance to sort of rewrite my story, or there would still be more life to be lived that could basically just turn things around and have a different public perception had I made, the appropriate choices.
Right. Yeah. It was a great story, and I think they did a follow-up.
Yeah, and so ESPN came, this was probably 2 years ago. It feels like I just live, you get older and life starts blurring. But they came a couple of years ago, and this was 2 or 3 years ago, they came and they just said, hey, can we do a follow-up to just kind of to catch you up 10 or 12 years later to see where you're at. And so it was kind of cool for them because some people who had seen you, and some of these people at that point, they were still working at ESPN, so they had seen me since high school. So to go from, an 18-year-old kid to a 40-year-old adult, to be around somebody or to watch them and just to watch these different events play over their life, it's a lot. And so, they seen you when you were a kid, and now you essentially have kids and your life is back in order. And it was cool because, some people ultimately, I think, we do miss this when people view you as a sports figure or someone who's notable. People want to see you do well, but they have to tell the stories of all of what's taking place. And so when you ultimately land back into a place where things start to get back to where they thought that they would be, people sort of like telling that story for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, it seemed like when you are incarcerated or whatever, you could go one of two ways.
Yeah.
You could, I guess, just continue to regress, or you could do what you did.
Yes.
Speaking engagements, talking on those.
Yeah. That documentary is what started all of that. So I hadn't done speaking engagements up to that point. So that came out, I want to say 12 or 13. 12 or 13 in the winter time. And then they told me once it came out, people would call me to speak to sort of unpack the story or, talk about different choices and decisions made at different phases of my life. And that sort of got the thing going. But once business got going, that's when all of that stuff kind of I had to tail it off because, believe it or not, you get on that road and you can, for one speaking engagement, you typically have to leave the day before. And then you're gone the entire day. And then typically, when you're done speaking at 8:30 at night, you can't get back. And then by the time you get on the plane to connect and come back, you lose 2 or 3 days. And so when you have kids or when you just have business, you just can't lose 2 or 3 days just because, so much depends on you depending on, where you're at in various businesses and whatever your responsibilities are.
A lot of stuff, I think, underlying issues that you had, like depression and stuff like that, you have no idea that you're even going through it at the time. And I know you created a foundation or an organization that helps with those issues?
Yeah, just what Red's on. Yeah, so, when I was going through, and I think this was just being younger. When I was younger, the word mental health or mental wellness there just wasn't a public or a private concept of it. You have to take everything and put it into context. I grew up in Youngstown. I grew up in, an inner city, and the mass majority of the stuff, if you're going through something that may feel emotionally, negative or emotionally unhealthy, you're either drinking, smoking, or just doing something personal to sort of get by. But you never say, hey, man, let me go seek out some professional help, or let me sit down with a psychologist, or let me sit down with somebody who can help me to create or gain a skill through this, right? And so up until that point, before things sort of fell apart at Ohio State, the only negative effects I had was either something in the community where you can sort of equip yourself for that, where, you either get with your brothers and cousins or people from your neighborhood and you can bat negativity that way, or you just create this resilience and fortitude that kids who are tougher, who grow up in these tough environments often create just through proximity to the environment. The environment causes you to be a little harder to get out there, right? Or you channel yourself with sports, or if there's something in regards to sports, you can say, hey, coach, could you get me better? Could you help me lift a weight? Or could you help me do something? But when you leave out an environment and you're navigating another world that you've never been a part of, right? So you're on the college campus and you're dealing with, just expectations of how to behave, or expectations with schoolwork, or expectations of, what does it mean to represent the Ohio State brand, and all of these things from a personal standpoint. These things don't coincide with where I've come from. I come from a place of survival. And the thing that people end up loving on the field was just me expressing. When you're in the football, you're just expressing. When you're hitting somebody, you're just expressing, or you're just doing something that doesn't require a professional interface. Make sense?
Sure. 100%.
Yeah, and so when things sort of fell apart, you have to live life now. That's when things started to get a little confusing for me. And then you start to get depressed, and then you say, okay, well, I don't feel good. I'm not in school. I don't feel happy. I don't feel joyous. Let me drink, let me smoke. And then all of these things create, they're like an artificial void is filled.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then people, you don't know about addiction at this time. And then you're drinking, you're drugging, and where somebody may do it for leisure or unwinding after work or for a celebratory moment, you're doing it to function. And then once those worlds sort of get mixed in, conflicted, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Then you're heading down a slippery slope. And so there's just a lot into that. There's a lot to deal with. This expectation that you're this big tough football player. There's an expectation that you're supposed to have things all together. There's a thing that just think about the context of this. When you were younger, you're not supposed to feel pain.
Right.
You're supposed to be tough and rough everything through, so you don't know how to ask for help. And so it wasn't until you hit rock bottom that you say, oh, I don't have this together. I do need to figure out how to navigate my life.
Yeah, it's like a lot of facilities or organizations, you can see what's wrong. Like someone's disabled or has an injury, but mental health, you can't see it.
No.
So that is probably the most difficult thing to get a handle on or help people with, because you don't know, you can't look in the book and say, okay, well, this is what's wrong with them, let's do this. Because every situation's got to be different.
Yeah, correct. Well, you can now, after being around it for 11 years, my lived experience for probably my life, and I just didn't realize I had different issues everybody has mental health. Just like you have physical fitness, your mental fitness is something, right? And both places have to be in shape, right? So I can look back now and say, I probably wasn't in shape mentally before. But now, once I deal with professionals, counselors, psychologists, behavioral health specialists, all of these people who deal with behavior, you can start to see the behaviors that coincide with somebody being depressed. Okay. When they start to isolate themselves, the wording that they use, their appearance that they have, not having goals, not having a zest for life, not having anything that they're talking about they're looking forward to. People who ruminate and constantly talk about the same issues and the same problems over and over again. And if you looked at me around that time, I was constantly talking about the same thing over and over again. And if you said in a more simpler fashion, me and you, we can't talk about last Tuesday forever, or we'll stay stuck in last Tuesday. And it makes sense if I said Tuesday in a simple form, but it's the same thing with people's problems. They'll stay stuck on the problem, and they'll talk about the anatomy of the problem for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks where, hey man, that happened, but we have to get over that, whether we like what took place or not.
Right.
We have to accept it, and we have to move forward and get to life. And so I didn't have the skills or the awareness to do that at that point. Okay. And so if you see somebody and you've been around professionals, they have what you call assessments. When you start to assess people, just this period where we're sitting down talking to each other, and I'm just gathering all of the facts of your life to determine, who's in front of me, what am I dealing with, where is he at mentally, what is he going through, and then how do I create a treatment plan to sort of create goals and objectives to get you to a different place mentally. So after you be around it so much and you're around a bunch of people who happen to be in this condition, you can then start to see and say, okay, like I get this now. I get he's depressed, or he's stressed, or he's blaming others, or there's some cognitive behavioral therapy work that has to take place for this person to gain skills to, get to a different place in life, or to make better decisions and choices. So didn't have the awareness then, but that was why we created the Red Zone. So I said, okay, thinking is a skill. And if you don't have the skills, you don't have the ability to, do what it is you're requesting your body to do, or your mind to do. And so it took the skill building and the awareness to then engage in the work. But that was something that I wanted to give to younger people back home, or at least the ability to say, hey, I have some skills that will help me and assist me in govern myself.
So the Red Zone's in Youngstown.
Yes, correct.
And how many facilities? Do you have 1 or 2 facilities?
Yeah, so we have one fairly large facility in Youngstown where we service about 600 kids on a weekly basis, and about 60 adults, split between male and female, who we house in a different capacity. But I do have a social service agency here in Columbus, where it's not the Red Zone, but it's labeled it's still a behavioral health agency that we're doing work down here in Columbus. But it's called Champions Bridge, where we house individuals who have different behavioral health needs.
So that's a new facility?
Yes, the social work the same, but a different type of social work. And so we have housing for kids. We have a wellness campus. That's where I purchased the hotel. So I purchased the hotel, and we're helping to house young people. I say young people, kids from ages 5 to 17. And then we house a group of people or kids who are aging out of foster care system, senior citizens who happen to be homeless for various reasons, where it'll start for short-term housing and end up into long-term housing for seniors. And then we'll have various needs for women who may be homeless upon giving birth to a child. And then we have people who come out of justice policy programs, so people who come out of prisons, probation, parole, and they may have different housing insecurities in some capacity. So we're just a partner in some sorts with the state and the county and the city of Columbus to, help with various housing needs.
When is that available now, or is
that's available now?
Okay.
No, we're up, we're operational. We, accept people. We have people in there, and then we're also just a regular hotel. So just various types of housing, but strategic housing with the state, the city, and the county here in Franklin County.
Okay, and then the facility in Youngstown, that has housing as well?
Yeah, so we have housing, but those are the various forms of housing. So we have houses as big as 11,000 square feet all the way down to 1,500 square feet. And so depending upon the need, the sex, and basically how they end up landing to us. But then we also have programming. So I actually bought a school and renovated a school. And so we do after school programming out of the school, and then we do services, psychological, social, and emotional support services with about 600 kids on a weekly basis in the Mahoning Valley area.
Okay, and so you like pick them up from school and take them right to the facility, or?
Yeah, so the way that works is you have groups of kids, you have either therapists or qualified mental health specialists who they'll have caseloads of people. So people who are identified by building staff of kids that they want us to work with. And you'll have some sort of therapeutic intervention that has to take place based upon your need that we figure out once you're assessed. And then from there, you have staff members who schedule all time who end up working with you throughout the entire year. And then for kids who need extra work or extra help, be it academically or through therapeutic interventions, those kids end up coming to our after-school program. And so there was a school within the area, and it was just an old, dilapidated school. So I went through and renovated it, redid all 40,000 square feet, well, not 40,000 square feet, I redid the school and just kind of lightly rehabbed the gym. And we, got vans, got the vans for you all.
Okay.
so got a ton of our 15 passenger vans that we basically use to transport people back and forth. And so that is part of our after school program. So happy to feed, house, shelter, and provide various social services to all the people throughout the community. So just a resource. And it was through that and from there that I ended up connecting with Lieutenant Governor Tressel and Governor DeWine, that they asked me to come down here to Columbus and be an extension of that, along with people at the county level, so the county commissioners and other people here in Franklin County that wanted me to do similar work in Columbus.
Does it cost the individual anything to do any of that stuff?
No, so back home, so all this stuff, the vast majority of this is covered through your insurance plan.
Okay.
So through your insurance plan, you go back home and if a need is assessed, and no difference than if you had a foot and ankle issue, your insurance will cover that. From a behavioral health standpoint, they've done a great job with creating resources throughout our managed care organizations to basically help people out. And the same thing here with the county. The county helps to subsidize people who can't afford housing for whatever reason. And so that's probably the number one bipartisan issue that both people agree to, is that, hey, if we want to attract businesses, if we want to attract people, if we want to attract safe housing, you can't be dealing with people who are very transient or who have housing issues, right? Nobody wants to stand a business up next to a place where you have, and I don't want to offend anybody when I say this, but where you have a bunch of homelessness around, right? Mm-hmm. That just doesn't attract, patrons who want to come in your business and patronize, and you get it,
Sure.
You get all the stuff that comes from that. And so instead of sort of criticizing the issue, the state and the county says, okay, how do we partner with people to help us solve, contain, and help people to get going? So I will say this, and this is one thing I can't say I'm proud of. Nobody can come to our program unless they're working 30 hours.
Okay.
And so you have to be working in order for you to qualify to come through the door. And during the day, you have to be out working. If you're a kid even, you have to either be in school or in some form of higher education. And all of my partners do a good job of ensuring that they have case management and case workers who are helping you to basically come stay here temporarily and get back out to the community to become productive and I guess responsible citizen. Heard it 1,000 times. If you do the things that you enjoy, you'll never truly work a day in your life. Mm-hmm. Whenever I'm around social service in some capacity, housing in some capacity, that doesn't feel like work.
Okay.
That doesn't, because it almost feels like your life is being spent in like an honorable way. Because like when we actually helping to house somebody, your efforts on earth is helping to give somebody a place to live, a place to set their stuff, their belongings, their memories, space they can create memories, space that they can feed themselves, bathe themselves. You know what I'm saying? And so it feels like your life force is helping somebody.
I think one of the biggest things that it sounds like is giving people hope. I hope is probably the strongest thing that you could give someone.
Yeah, and one of my favorite books as a man think is the first time I read it, 2006. It said, "Aimless thoughts are vice." And so when you have aimless people, when you have no hope, when you have no direction, you get a scattered mind, and you get people who don't care about themselves. And when people don't care about themselves, they don't care about you.
That's great. How many employees do you have?
I don't know. We're over, 500. I have the stuff that I do with all foot and ankle needs. So I own a series of podiatry practices as well. So we probably have, maybe 300, 350 employees do that. And then if you add in on the other stuff that we do, it's probably close to 500. And I would just say, just a rough number. I'm just thinking about payroll.
Right,
So,
sure. Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And do you have volunteers? Do you guys do?
Yeah, and so for the social service work, that's more, you'll get more people to sort of volunteer in that space. Because when you think of social service, you're thinking more of It's an extension of the church, an extension of Habitat for Humanity, an extension of the United Way, an extension of, the YMCA, the YWC are people who have seen things that may not affect them at their front door, but they say, hey, I've been fortunate. My life has been great. Is there something I can do? Like, I'll give you an example. There's a class at Ohio University. They had a class that they're helping to build out a pantry, what do you call those things? Like a closet of gently used clothes, things like that. Mm-hmm. Gently used shoes, or just different items that they just may have that they don't need, that these kids or younger people can need, or that they'll need during their transition, toiletries, and stuff like that. So they've actually come over to the hotel and they've demoed one of the rooms. They're taking down the wallpaper and they're using their own stuff to paint it, and they want to make it into a space that they own, but a landing space for resources that they know will be used by somebody who actually needs it. So you'll have volunteers like that. So, I don't know, and a lot of people don't see it. Volunteer work doesn't get highlighted as much as business just because it is what it is. But you have a bunch of people who care about America or care about their home state or community, in different capacities. And so, money isn't the only way you can contribute to people's lives. Just having people look at these people like human beings, having people, interface with them who just like, hey, man, I'm here to help you. And I may not know your story exactly, and I may not want to be here every day to help you, but this sliver of time and this sliver of help that I have for you, I'll go ahead and give it to you for that. And so there's just a ton of stuff that, there's a bunch of people who do to help the cause. Or, we had a series of this is probably the craziest thing that I've seen in a very long time. There's a veteran guy who's lived over in the neighborhood for about 40 years. And this is about a hotel. And this man literally gets up every day and just goes and, with one of those extended trash pickers. Mm-hmm. And he literally just picks up the trash in the area just because he wants to make the space look better. And I tried to compensate him. I said, thanks for cleaning up the trash on the property. He's like, no, he's like, this is all of our community. And so you have stuff like that, it's serious. And people who just have good hearts and just want to improve community.
If someone wanted to get involved, how would they contact you? Or is there a website? Or
well, I don't have a website built for the thing here in Columbus, but it's so informal these days. They can just reach out to me through Instagram, Twitter, or any means like that, and I can just kind of tell them whatever we have going on if they want me to help in hand. But my mass majority focus is the seniors and the kids, and so, we have a bunch of senior citizens over at the location. So if it's anything that they would be remotely interested in doing that had to do with senior citizens or kids, because the seniors, that becomes the ignored population, whether you know it or not. And when you see them, when you see senior citizens who may be couch surfing or senior citizens who just don't have help, or, you'd be surprised, just like basic store runs we run to stores for seniors. It's actually insane and crazy that, you can help to raise people your whole life. And then as you get a little bit older and they get busy, you seem to be forgotten in some capacity. And so if there's anything that anybody wanted to do in any capacity, just being able to help with either an idea with either kids or seniors is probably my main focus.
Okay. And is there a program similar to that at the Red Zone? Or is that just primarily mental health and substance abuse and stuff like that?
So back home with the Red Zone, that's more mental health, substance abuse, younger kids who are in school, and adults who come from prisons and drug rehabs. That's that. You can put a fence around that.
Okay.
And the housing is in scattered sites. You probably have maybe 6 or 7 scattered sites of sort of congregate housing. And then once they leave us, we don't do any long-term housing up there. They just kind of either go back to the community that they're from. Columbus is a bit different because it's a focus around seniors in a campus where you have 24/7 security and, I don't want to say academic, but
like programming
for the younger kids. And so same work, but a bit different. It's like, probably the best way to explain is like NFL and football and arena football. It's the same. It's football,
right?
But playing different
for sure.
Yeah.
So I was going a different direction, but the follow-up episode that they did, it showed that you were reconnected with Ohio State.
Yeah.
So that was great to see because you are a huge part of the story of Ohio State. And everything. So when do you have a capacity with Ohio State now?
Yeah, so I go down every Tuesday, Thursday. And, obviously I've graduated to have a relationship with the entire team. But when I initially started out, it was just myself and Coach Day who had created rapport. And we would sit, we would meet. And I think that there was a ton that I had learned from being with Uconn Basketball for the last 6 years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so just watching them go back to back, building culture, and just watching that, when you watch somebody sort of like manufacture what you see, you start to realize like success is not an accident. You could do it as a player, you could be a part that's being driven by somebody else. But when you become an adult and you see that people have high levels of success for an extended period of time, you start to realize that there's a science and a method to it. You know what I mean? And when I came back to Ohio State, and that was Coach Trussell who had converged me and Coach Day to sit down and talk and get on the same page. And there was a lot that I was sharing from being in that environment. And he just had a lot of the right pieces, a lot of older kids who had came back and they had something to prove and so on and so forth. And then you had the right magic. And then he had the right intensity because there was a period where he had to prove himself and step away from what Urban Meyer had done. Like just how Urban had to separate from Trussell. His big thing was, hey, you now have to push this thing into another level. And he did that. And so it started there. And then, I was there 1 day a week, year one. And then he hit me up in the off season. He said, hey, man, could you come around more? So I came around in the spring. And then it started to spend more time throughout the summer, just spending more time and connecting with the kids. And he was saying, hey, man, this position group is people who I think that won't have a problem, but could you make a connection with this position group and this player and that player? And I told him I couldn't do much more than what it was that I was currently doing just because I have other stuff to do during the day. And I'll say I have zero interest in being a coach. Those guys, actually, they spend entirely too much time around football all year round doing that stuff. I can never see myself doing that unless you were fully dedicated to doing that. I wouldn't even try to go down that journey. The money's not worth it to me, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's an off-season at all with college sports.
There is an off-season, and I respectfully said it. I'm not saying it like in a disparaging way. I respectfully said it to the guys who chose that as their profession. But I'm not that passionate enough about coaching to where I want to give up my life. Right. I still like picking my kids up from daycare when I do it. I like kind of, hanging out with them as much. And so you just give up a lot. When you decide to coach, I know people see that they're compensated a lot, but you literally give up a lot of your life. And it is very intense with that environment. And all football isn't created the same. Ohio State football and the pressure behind it and the pressure to reform is a lot different than just your average program.
It seems like you would be the perfect match for the position that they gave you because you've seen it all, done it all. I mean, lived that pressure life, and you can connect with the players because they're going through the same thing you
Correct.
did. So I think that would be perfect because especially the mental side of the game, it's got to be probably 100 times worse than the physical side.
1,000%, and that's where people struggle. But it's not like one big thing that happens. It's having people around who you can just talk to and get something off your chest that isn't football related, but somebody who you feel like can relate to you. Or if something goes wrong, you have somebody there. Like there's value in. There's actually, to me, more value in not being connected to the coaching staff. Because they don't view you as though, you know what I mean? Right. So if, I've gotten the occasional like, man, what the fuck are they talking about? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I've gotten the, man, fuck, I want to quit. But, hey, man, come here. Let me talk to you real quick. This is what you're actually going through. And sometimes when somebody can just actually walk you through what you're going through, and they can walk you through of like, okay, this is how you can change or how to be better, you just start to have a different perspective because you say, okay, it's not that bad.
So I know Coach Day, one of his initiatives or things he supports is mental health as well. Yeah. Do you guys get into that at all or talk about that very much?
No, I mean, he told me where it originated from a lot was with his father, but I think he's probably, I'm pretty sure, I'm not the only one who says this. He's probably one of the more thoughtful coaches I've ever been around. probably more humane and sensible. I don't know where he really gets it from, but we've never discussed it. But if you see how he lives his life and just sees how he interacts with players, like it just, I don't know. You would wish or you would think more people could be like that. They can separate the ego and the pretentiousness from the sport, but they can't. But I think that's why they've chosen him to lead the show, because he can separate it, and he very much so. He cares about the intensity that you bring to the sport, but he also cares about the human being that you are becoming. And so I just call it like everything. You learn from who you learn from, and then you add on your deal. But the only thing I told him was like it was very similar to in a lot of different ways, not the same personality, but very similar to Coach Trussell with the thoughtfulness of people.
Okay.
And so I can say that he's a lot alike in that neighborhood.
I've met Coach Trussell a couple of times, and the way he interacts with people, you feel like you know him or known him for a long time when he interacts with you.
Yeah.
So. As far as you've written 2 books.
Yeah, well, the one I partnered with is a guy named Bob Eckhart. He used to be my professor at Ohio State. And so he just helped to pin my life up until that point. And so we used to always talk about never wanting too much time to get between what was happening versus what had happened, right? So he was saying, hey, man, your life is changing and there's going to be a lot that happens in the future. But up until this point, while you can still remember it, let's document it.
Okay.
And so we sat down for about 2 years just dumping my thoughts, right? And then he organized them, and then he loves to write. He loves to read, loves to write, and loves to tell stories. He's an English professor at Ohio State.
Okay.
Right? And so this was right up his alley. And so we had documented up until that point. And then the other writings was just me sort of journaling my thoughts or blogging my thoughts in prison. And so it really had no direction. It was just like a place of pure expression, right? And it was cool because during all of like this transformation, like you're just writing down what you're thinking, writing down what you visualize for your life and what do you want to become. And so, I had a chance to do that, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then I had a chance for Bob to write that part and piece of my life. But then, once you start living and working and building, there'll be other stuff to write. And hopefully, just like now, hopefully it inspires people. Like I've literally been inspired by books. What started my change was me reading. And it was books that inspired me. And I know now, this is before we had everything digital and audio books and stuff like that and YouTube and, different forms of media. But there's nothing more powerful than learning. There's nothing more powerful that inspires change than independent learning.
Okay.
Things that you go get yourself and search for yourself and, you add value to yourself and so on and so forth.
What are the names of the books?
Well, probably the biggest book that started the change was As a Man Thinketh. That's by James Allen. And that was a book that just got me think. That was a book that helped me understand that thoughts were things. And I never in my life thought of a thought as a thing. I just thought something like a thought was like something that randomly happened. And it was like basically nothing intelligent happens until thought is connected with purpose. Nothing changes but circumstance and opportunity. The character of a man should be revealed up under every condition. And it would have these small blurbs, and the book is about 70 pages long. But it was all talking about how a thought, like whatever seed you put in the ground, like you said, nothing comes from corn but corn, nothing comes from nettles but nettles. And it almost likened to thoughts as basically like look at them as the way like a farmer looks at a seed. If you put corn in the ground, corn is coming up. If you put a negative thought in your head, there's nothing but negativity that can come from it. And then that steered me into a book once I got to prison, because in the county jail, you can only have 2 or 3 books. But when I got to prison and I started ordering books out of this catalog called Bargain Books, there was a book called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. And it was the hidden determinants behind human behavior. But that was breaking down thought more mechanically of how thought actually originates, and then how it originates through your life in scales of consciousness, and how different behaviors are associated with different levels of consciousness, and why things are attracted to you the way that they are, and how to separate illusion from reality. And I was like, this is interesting. And it started making sense because I had the time to reflect on my life and what it was that I was doing. And then he had Truth versus Falsehood, and what was the third book? It was a third book in that series, but there was a series of books that I read through him, and then I went down this journey of reading everything out of the personal development section. I remember the first book I got by Wallace D. Wattles, The Science of Getting Rich. And when I got The Science of Getting Rich, I thought it was something that had to do with finances. It had everything to do about like just being spiritually rich and personally rich. Okay. And it had different content in there about money and finances, but it didn't have anything to, but the main objective was just about you becoming rich, right? And you personally and mentally and emotionally developing yourself. And so after there, that sort of led me down to, okay, this gets you personally well, but then how do you think about business? And then that led me down ordering, the Incorporated magazine, and I read the Wall Street Journal every day for probably like 2 or 3 years, probably 3 years. Then I would read The Economist. We would get that a week delayed. And then I would read Entrepreneur. And, we were locked down for 20 hours of the day. So I just would basically sit and read all day. And so you literally have nothing to do. So it would be like if we just got locked in here.
Right.
And your only way to the outside world, like you cut off the computers, you would say, okay, if I want to get outside of this room, I need to start reading, just to exercise my brain. But then what happens is that when you are restricted with resources, your imagination becomes strong because you start to say, how do I make this work? Oftentimes when you have too many resources, all of the resources can make you comfortable. You follow where I'm coming from?
Sure.
But when you don't have them, your imagination becomes very powerful. And you say, man, how do I make this idea work? Or who do I need to talk to? And it just like triggers a thought.
Okay.
And then it leads you to more information, it creates like an ambition inside you to say, I can make this thing work if I had the opportunity. So you just start to read an assortment of books. And so that's how things change. And then that's what I learned about Robert Kiyosaki and Think and Grow Rich and Cash Flow Quadrant. And when I first read the Cash Flow Quadrant, that's the first time I've heard of an investor or being self-employed, a business owner, and just the quadrant of like how you make money. And then that got me into a book about taxes. And so once you start reading from all this stuff, you start to understand these concepts. But then you say, okay, where does this apply to the real world? And then that's when you say, oh, learning is fun. And this thing is cool and I can change my life. But you still have to exit prison and say, okay, now I have to start with step one. And then you have to believe in the information that you've read, that you've gotten it right, or that you at least interpret it right. And so when people see me now, this is just a slow interpretation of things read years ago.
So when you first got out, what was the first thing that you did to start the journey down business and stuff like that?
Well, I went to go play football in Omaha, Nebraska. That was the first thing I did back in 2010, fall of 2010. And I saved up enough money. And the first thing I did with money was to start a football camp to get more money. So in the off season, I said, let me train people to make money, to get enough money to invest in ideas, or the ideas I had. And what actually happened before I got into the first business that I wanted to get into, ESPN, that came with the 30 for 30. So the 30 for 30 kind of came, I probably had $10,000 saved, $20,000 saved. But after we shot the film for a year, that sort of took me and put me on the road for 2 years. And it was after 2 years, like I had I was speaking so much that I don't know how many checks I had that I just had in cash. At that point I didn't have virtual deposit where you could deposit money. You had to actually go physically go to the bank. And that was around that time. And literally, that's when I was able to start saving up enough money at that point to then get into transportation. That was 2013, 14, somewhere around there, where I was first starting getting into transportation. And then transportation, I also got into packaging because I learned how to leverage my minority business enterprise certificate. And I started doing work with Cardinal Health. And I started brokering pallets, stretch film, and various corrugated packages with Cardinal Health for pharmaceutical products. And then I was doing last mile delivery. This was before Amazon trucks had come. So there was a company called Lasership that was out in Groveport. In Groveport, for anybody here in town, in Columbus. And so they had a, warehouse out in Groveport, and they would basically broker the work. So that was my introduction to business.
Who how did you get into the mental health, like the Red Zone? How did that all come?
So all that programming happened in prison. So I was doing it in prison, and I never knew it was an actual real business. And it didn't happen until I went to Toledo in 2014, 15. I was doing a speaking engagement, and a gentleman was talking to some younger athletes about CBT work, cognitive behavioral therapy work. And he was like, hey, there's an exercise where they say, where you have to activate an event, the mind activity, the body reaction, the consequence. And it's an exercise that if like a conflict happens, what's the activating event? What is my mind thinking of? What is my body reaction? What's the consequence? If I do something wrong to you, the consequence is I go back to prison. If I do something right, here's the consequence. And you do that over and over again to train you to say, hey, now I have the equipment to basically, put myself in a better situation, right? And so they were doing this exercise, and I asked the guy, I said, where did you learn this from? I thought this was like prison work, right? But you're doing it outside of here. And he said, I learned this because I own a behavioral health agency. And I said, man, well, what is that? And so he was like, well, they explained to me what it was. And I was like, well, how do I get involved in something like this? Like this would work in Youngstown, right? So we were way over here in Toledo, Northwest Ohio. And I said, man, if I was in Northeast Ohio, like this is what helped me in prison, and this is what you can do with kids. And so he conceptually was telling me about it. And then I just learned from prison, and this was just reading, as like, consultants sort of help you skip all the stuff that you don't know, right? And so I said, I don't want to learn. Not that I didn't want to learn from him.
It's just a lot.
Man, let me go hire a professional who has the skill set to teach me. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Your job is to teach me what it is I don't know. So I hired a consulting group, and they set me down for maybe like 7 months and just walked me through what it was that I need to know to basically get the process started. And 11 years later, or 12 years later.
That's great. That's awesome. So quite a life that you have. and you got a lot more to go.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So I just wanted to thank you for coming in.
No problem.
And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And that concludes our episode with Maurice Clarett. Tune in next time when I'll bring you another great individual with a great cause. And remember, show your good side out there, everybody.